Thank you for joining me. I'm Julie Belew, and this is Rape, the Podcast. In this episode, you're going to hear some amazing advice from a survivor of child molestation. But first, let's find out about how my town of Springfield, Missouri is addressing the systemic problem of how we treat rape victims. I wasn't able to secure any interviews with anyone involved with the Springfield Sexual Assault Task Force until they presented their report. That was released on November 12, 2019. The members of the task force included Sharon Alexander of Legal Services of Southern Missouri, Sarah Bargo of Me Too Springfield, Brandy Bartell of the Victim Center, Lisa Farmer of the Harmony House, she was the chair of the task force, Phyllis Ferguson, Mayor Pro Tem, Jan Fisk of the City Council, Dee Ogilvie from the National Association of Women Southwest Missouri Chapter, Linda Serturno, Child Advocacy Center representative, and Janice Thompson community representative. And we've already heard from her. The task force also acknowledged in the report the contributions and good work of those who assisted in the development of this report, including the sexual assault survivors who provided information and feedback, the Springfield Police Department, the prosecutor's office, the Cox Health and Mercy SANE programs, and others. The task force was charged with the following: review current city practices regarding sexual assault. Research and review identified best practices for the prevention, reporting, and investigation of sexual assaults throughout the United States. Review and recommend specialized training and education opportunities that are available to first responders and service providers throughout the community so they have necessary and up-to-date skills to most successfully and effectively work with victims of sexual assault. Consider and make recommendations regarding an education campaign with the goal of teaching primary, secondary, and tertiary safety and prevention management to reduce sexual assault within the community. And finally, recommend an ongoing approach to measure the progress of implementation of the task force recommendations. The report includes background information. The number of sexual assaults within the city of Springfield is not acceptable to leaders, stakeholders, and citizens, and demonstrates the need for a proactive, unified approach to addressing sexual assault. The city's sexual assault numbers listed below only include incidents that were reported. Thus, the actual number of sexual assaults is larger than reflected in the numbers below because many sexual assaults are not reported. Sexual assault is an issue that impacts all persons regardless of age, sex, race, gender identity, disability, socioeconomic background, to name a few. While sexual assault impacts all persons, including children and the elderly, there are certain populations that are more at risk of becoming a victim of sexual assault. The task force report is very interesting. The report lists the number of sexual assaults in Springfield from 2008 up through 2019 when this report was released. In 2013, the FBI changed the definition of rape and the way crimes are reported, creating an increase in the number of rape kits on an annual basis. In 2014, Springfield realized an increase in untested rape kits due to the change in the law and underfunding for the state crime lab to handle the increased number of rape kits. In collaboration with the Missouri Attorney General, Missouri Highway Patrol, and the Missouri Crime Lab, the Springfield Police Chief worked to resolve this backlog. Springfield has taken several important steps toward developing a plan to reduce sexual assault and improve victim reporting and outcomes within the city by working with community stakeholders to improve law enforcement training and embed advocates at the police department, collaboratively create the Greene County Family Justice Center, utilize law enforcement tax dollars to increase the number of detectives in the city's Crimes Against Persons unit, waive the incident report fee for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, and to enhance sexual assault materials distributed through the police department. The City of Springfield Chief of Police was also selected to serve on the Missouri Attorney General's Task Force on Sexual Assault Kits. They say the scope of the problem is that the response to sexual assault victims, women, men, non-binary, and children, is an issue that has received much national attention over the last couple of decades. However, the fact remains that most sexual assaults, both nationally and in Springfield, are never reported to local law enforcement. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that as recently as 2014, only 1/3 of rapes and sexual assaults were being reported to the police. Further, when victims do come forward to report a rape or sexual assault, the majority of cases will not be prosecuted. The reasons for this are varied. There are often lengthy delays in rape kit testing at the state crime labs. Most cases are suspended by law enforcement due to insufficient evidence. Some are suspended by the victim, and some are declined by the prosecution. As an example, out of the 336 reported cases in 2018 in Springfield, just 19, or 6%, resulted in charges being filed. There are many factors that contribute to the lack of reporting and victims opting out of the prosecution process. According to the Police Executive Research Forum, rape is an extremely intimate crime and victims suffer physical as well as emotional harms that can be devastating. As victims try to cope with the trauma of the crime itself, they often suffer additional harm when they are subtly or not so subtly blamed for being victimized in ways that victims of robbery or theft or any other crime are never blamed. Finally, sexual assault victims who summon the courage to report the crime to the police are often subjected to a criminal justice system that seems insensitive, uncaring, or even hostile to victims. Other contributing factors include such things as the length of time it takes to prosecute cases, which can result in victim fatigue, a judicial system that is not always educated in trauma-informed practices, and a general and widespread lack of community awareness about the criminal justice system and victims' rights. While Springfield has made great strides in the response to sexual assault victims over the last 2 decades, there is more that can and should be done to ensure that victims are not afraid to report, to make the criminal justice system more trauma-informed, and to improve outcomes for victims. Here's Lisa Farmer from the Harmony House to talk more about the process of the Sexual Assault Task Force.
We divided into 3 different work groups. The first couple of meetings, we called them listening meetings. And so we heard from Chief Williams and the police department. We heard from Mercy and Cox SANE programs. We heard from the prosecutor's office. I feel like there was somebody else. But so we listened for the first couple of meetings because we wanted to hear from other perspectives what's working well, what's not working so great. And so from there, we did a summary session and summarized what we heard and what we thought were the biggest issues from the listening session and from our own knowledge base, because we had the Victim Center, the Child Advocacy Center, we had 3 survivors, we had
a lot of experience
experience and a lot of knowledge around the table. And so after that, then we divided into 3 work groups, and each group tackled a different aspect of it. So one group, one of the needs we heard about was we don't feel like we have a good baseline of knowledge or data in our community about what do our community members as a whole know about sexual assault and sexual violence. What do they understand? What do they not understand? So we had one group that focused on data collection and education, community education. We had another group that focused on the judicial system and offender accountability, because that was one of the other things that we heard, that offender accountability is an issue in our community, holding offenders accountable, and just the judicial system sometimes is obviously part of that issue. So that was one area that we looked at. What can we do there? The other area was, and a big piece of it, is victim fallout and victim advocacy. So why do victims drop out of the criminal justice process? Because that's a big issue. Yeah, victims will they'll report and they'll maybe start the prosecution process. And then at some point they will fall out of it. They will stop going forward. So why is that happening? And are other communities dealing with that better? So those were the 3 areas, and each work group identified different resources and looked at different communities.
The SATF recommends to the City Council that the following steps be taken to address sexual assault and better support sexual assault victims in our community. Number 1, appoint a qualified team to focus on a gaps analysis of sexual assault data collected within the private and public sectors, and to conduct a community survey on attitudes and norms about sexual assault and sexual violence in Springfield. The reason they say is based on their work. They believe there is already good local data available about sexual assault and victim response needs in Springfield. However, the data needs to be gathered and then analyzed from a systems perspective. The task force also believes that there is a data gap in the area of community attitudes, education, and awareness about sexual assault and sexual violence. They believe that before we, as a community, can better address our response to sexual assault, we must first understand the current state. Thus, a comprehensive analysis of the data is required as a first step. The data team should focus on conducting an analysis of currently available local sexual assault and victim data, development of a community survey to measure community attitudes and awareness and education about sexual assault, establishment of new and improved systems for meeting gaps in data collection processes, sharing data across systems to create improved system-wide communication in response to victims' needs, and repeating the survey on a 3 to 5 year basis to measure community attitudes and changes in attitudes since the last survey, identify trends and measure general awareness about sexual assault and progress made from prior education campaigns. It just sounds like they're taking this seriously. I'm so glad. Number 2, based on the data analysis and community survey, develop and implement a community education and awareness program to improve Springfield area social norms regarding sexual violence. The rationale is a key charge to the task force was to make recommendations regarding education for both first responders and the broader community. It is the perception of the task force that there are ample educational opportunities available about sexual assault and sexual violence and trauma-informed practices for first responders, healthcare professionals, law enforcement, and others in the victim service field. Task force members were in consensus, however, that education targeting the general community, including marginalized sectors with information about sexual assault and violence and victims' rights, is not as abundant and is essential to preventing sexual violence and improving the likelihood that victims will report and not fall out of the system. The task force recommends that a community awareness campaign be developed and implemented. Specific recommendations include the following. Led by the City of Springfield Public Information Office, establish a qualified work group to help shape and implement the campaign. Based upon data analysis, identify the target audience and key messages to include public education about victim rights and how to file victim case concerns through the Springfield Police Department and Victim Center Joint Hotline. Implement the campaign with special attention to communicating to marginalized audiences. Update the campaign as needed based on new community survey data and repeat the campaign on a 3 to 5 year basis to refresh community awareness and bring forward new information developed in the field. Maybe they could participate in a podcast to help get the information out there too. I don't know, just an idea. And finally, they are going to consider implementing or expanding other best practice awareness programs such as Green Dot. And there's a link to Green Dot on rapethepodcast.com, along with any other information here that I've mentioned, such as the crime statistics. They also want to collaborate to create a Springfield Greene County Integrated Sexual Violence Court and implement ongoing education opportunities about victims and trauma-centered practices. The rationale is it is essential for law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, the court system, and key victim service organizations to work together toward a common goal of holding offenders accountable and improving outcomes for victims. The task force believes there would be tremendous benefit in the establishment of a Springfield Greene County Integrated Sexual Violence Court. It's their belief that such a court will not only reduce further victim trauma and improve overall outcomes for victims, but by streamlining the process for victims, judges, and staff, will potentially ease the burden on the court system as well. The task force would like it noted that there is a need for ongoing judicial education about trauma and trauma-centered approaches. Specifically, the task force believes a statewide initiative to require annual continuing judicial education in this area would benefit sexual assault victims in all Missouri communities. There is a need to educate victims about their rights and how to file complaints when they believe those rights have not been upheld. The task force encourages Springfield City Council to facilitate opportunities for these agencies and groups to regularly work together for the improvement of the criminal justice system and the victim experience within it. A quarterly or biannual meeting focused on sexual assault response held with the members of these 3 entities, as well as other key partners, would be a good first step Additionally, this group should consider releasing a semi-annual community report based on the compilation of local sexual violence data from partnering agencies. They also recommend that the City of Springfield continue to explore and pursue potential funding sources so that additional victim advocates can be embedded within the Springfield Police Department to ensure that trauma-informed procedures are utilized in all work with victims and that victims' rights are upheld throughout a trauma-informed, victim-centered investigative process. And the reasoning for that is the task force recognizes that the caseload for officers handling sexual assaults is quite large. It's also recognizing that victim advocates are valuable partners to law enforcement throughout the criminal justice process. According to the Police Executive Research Forum, research has shown that victims who worked with advocates were more likely to have police reports taken and were less likely to have negative experiences with police officers than those who did not work with advocates. The recent award of the Violence Against Women's Improving Criminal Justice Responses Grant is an important and significant first step as it will fund 2 victims advocates to be embedded within the Springfield Police Department's sexual assault and domestic violence units. However, in order to ensure a victim advocate is available within the SPD 24/7, more are ultimately needed. Finally, the task force recommends that Springfield City Council include sexual assault initiatives as part of the annual legislative priorities that are taken forward to the Missouri legislature each year. The reason is the task force recognizes that some best practices and leading-edge sexual assault initiatives are beyond the scope of local government and will require a statewide mandate to drive systemic change. The City of Springfield should be a leader in encouraging the pursuit of statewide legislative reforms and initiatives that will improve trauma-informed practices within the criminal justice system, streamline the processing of rape kits, hold offenders accountable, enhance victim safety, and otherwise improve outcomes for sexual assault victims. In the final remarks, members of the Springfield City Council's Task Force on Sexual Assault says they appreciate the desire of the council to reduce sexual assault crimes and their concern for those victims in our community. With more than 85% of sexual assault perpetrators known by their victims, we know that our research and recommendations are not encompassing because we did not consider the significant impact of domestic violence in sexual assault cases. This task force would be remiss if it did not suggest that additional study and review of domestic violence in the Springfield community be considered in affecting and reducing the number of sexual assault cases in this area. If your city does not have a sexual assault task force, it should. So what can we do to help our community and help our friends and loved ones who have been traumatized and tried to bury it down so deep that the event gets fuzzy and cluttered with shame and anxiety and fear? What can we do? We can get busy, like Miss Janice has.
Now, the reason why I was so involved with the sexual assault task force was because I had survivors coming to me and telling me about the fee for getting copies of the reports. That made me mad. And I started contacting different people. I'm like, is it true? Do you have, and so I contacted at the Victim Center. Do you have people that come to you and say that I can't afford to get a copy of this report? Sometimes I said, listen, until I get this fixed, don't ever come to me. I will pay for a copy of a report. So I just did a little number research and I started looking around at what do we charge for a copy of an accident report? Because I work in a personal injury firm and I know that we pay for those.
Yeah.
And basically it would be the same thing. And I'm like, all right, I know that we're one of the cheapest places when it comes to copies of incident reports. And I started looking at other places and I presented to Jason Gage and to a couple of council members. And I said, hey, listen, we can make up the money over here. Why are we charging people? And it was very easy. They were very open to it. I just presented the case. And so that's when they went ahead and said, okay, we're going to get rid of it. Phyllis really took the lead on that. So Ferguson,
yes,
with the city council. And I think that's what put me into that arena of, hey, you're a community advocate. This is something you're willing to work for.
What made you think, now that you work for an attorney, so
Right.
you know a little bit about how the system works, but I wouldn't have thought of going to the city council. What made you think of that?
Just because I knew who set the prices. I reached out, who sets the prices for this? Who's the one that makes the decision on this? And it's really sometimes as simple as just calling and asking a question. Something I'd like to work on right now that I've reached out to Greene County and they're going to help me with in pulling numbers on is we don't offer lifetime protection orders in the state of Missouri. We're one of the few states that don't offer that. And if we have, the people are always arguing, well, we don't want that because of gun rights and all these other things. You'll have that varying arguments and people that are against it. But what if we offered it for victims who already have their abusers convicted? Once you're convicted, you're barred from having a life or from ever owning a gun again. So why wouldn't we just extend it to that? Mm-hmm. So I asked Greene County, I talked to them and I said, hey, can you give me an idea of how many ex partes are requested every year and then how many are renewals? Because that would really give me an idea. If people are willing to show up and renew those orders, that tells me that maybe we hear people argue all the time that, people will get an order of protection for no reason at all. And I've been in a courtroom and I've seen somebody request an order of protection because their neighbor looked at them funny. And I get that. That's frustrating. But if you're showing up and renewing, there's a reason for it. So maybe if I can look at some of that, let's look at that number. Maybe if we can make it so that we clear some of that backlog of, hey, somebody's been convicted of a violent felony. Let's extend that victim a lifetime order of protection. And they're not coming back into the court system. They're not clogging anything up. They still have the right to drop it later on if they choose to. But we're alleviating some of that. We're not taking away anybody's rights. We're just saying, all right, listen, this was a bad enough offense that maybe we can extend a lifetime order. It wouldn't be for everybody. I have a friend personally that the day after her abuser gets released from prison, she's supposed to show up to court to ask for the renewal of her order of protection.
So in that case, a lifetime protection would be warranted.
Perfect. Would be perfect because you're also putting everybody in danger because you're putting a violent offender in the same place as his victim, and he knows where she's going to be. She has no choice to show up. We see those stories all the time where victims don't show up to court because they're scared, or their abusers show up in the parking lot and do something to them, so they don't show up. And the attitude is, obviously she wasn't so scared because she didn't show up. Yeah. That's not the case at all. So anyway, that was a very long way to get around to how I got involved in this.
But it's important because people keep saying, we need to do something. We need to do something. And here I have somebody, you're doing something.
Trying to.
You're trying to. And that's the most you can do is try. Right. So knowing where to start, that's the hardest part.
It is.
What would you recommend? Just start asking questions?
Just ask questions. We all have that ability. Sometimes it just takes one person. If 50-50 parenting has come up quite a bit, and you will hear people argue for and against it. We as victims look at the 50-50 parenting option and we see the issue that comes up with it, where a lot of times we can't prove our abuse, but it's there. And people can look at the situation and they can see the abusive pattern, but maybe we didn't file charges. So you're putting us in a situation where we're presented with, we're going to split custody with somebody who's very dangerous. A lot of people don't realize that when I was going through what I went through with my ex-husband, Greg and I were in the middle of a custody battle at the time of the shooting. He had assaulted his girlfriend at the time and tried to rupture her eyeball with his thumb. My son was witness to that. Charges were reduced to a misdemeanor. He got put on probation. Parental right wasn't severed. But I stood my ground and I said, no, you're not going to get around my kid. I was brought into court and my ex-husband was attempting to file charges against me for violating a court order. This happens all the time. It's called family access. So I had to retain an attorney. I had to retain a guardian ad litem. And we had to go through this process where it was going to be decided if I ran the risk of actually losing custody to him. But the judge was going to look at it and he was going to say, hey, maybe this mom isn't doing something right. And I stood a chance of losing custody of my son. I could have also gained full custody. We didn't know. But when the shooting happened, what didn't automatically happen? I wasn't automatically given full custody of my son. So I still had to go through that process, even though he was held in the jail. I've gone through 5 modifications of my divorce trying to protect my kid. What people don't realize, and thankfully this judge recognized me from so many times in front of him, he said, listen, I can't sever parental right. Because even when somebody is convicted of a violent crime, you can't sever parental right in the state of Missouri unless you have somebody willing to adopt your child. Because the state doesn't want to take on that responsibility if something happens to you. I have a friend that she got parental rights severed from her abuser. It was $50,000 to adopt her own child. She had to adopt her own child. And she was married to somebody else, and that person adopted the child. But only then was she able to protect her daughter fully. So a lot of people don't realize all of these things are going on. I know it because I've been through the system so many times.
Well, and that costs money to go through the system. You've got to hire not just an attorney, but you got to hire a good attorney.
Right.
And somebody who's not going to just milk you for all it's worth,
right,
and believes you and understands you and is fighting for you and your children. That costs a lot of money and people don't have a lot of money.
Right. And sometimes you'll have attorneys that'll just tell you, and they are right to a degree. Doesn't matter. Judges don't care. And family court, the judge doesn't care. So when it comes to the 50-50 parenting, there are some flaws in that law that really put victims at risk, because what's the alternative? If we know we can't protect our child, we stay. So just Lisa and I and a couple of other survivors wrote letters that were read on the legislature floor. And it stopped it. And
you wrote letters
we just wrote letters to him explaining what our situation was, what our experience was, and why we needed the wording of this rule to change. We needed to take it from clear and convincing evidence to making it so that if there are accusations of domestic violence, that we look at that situation, not because you're rarely going to have clear and convincing evidence. You're rarely going to have a witness or a video recording of a domestic assault. We were lucky with the case with Greg. The whole thing was caught on surveillance video. And so had it not been, Greg would have been able to speak the narrative because one of his victims was in a coma. He would have been able to say, this is how it happened. And abusers are often very calm.
Is this your therapy, is going through this and becoming a community advocate?
I would say, I don't know that it's therapy so much. It's helpful, but it's more of I think a lot of us feel like we have a responsibility because really I shouldn't be here. Look at how violent he was. When we do look at the lethality, when we look at the red flags, I was strangled. I was stalked. He had a gun. I really shouldn't be here. He's told me over and over again that he would kill me. I take it as a personal hit. And most of the other advocates that I know, we take it as a personal hit when we see somebody murdered. We see somebody suffering. We know. And I think this is where we change it, is the victims that are coming forward and sharing their stories. Look at Me Too, what change that's brought. People just coming forward with their stories. Chanel Miller, who was raped by Brock Turner. Look at the change that she's making. It's one story. But it's not everybody else's fault that they don't understand how this works. I hope you don't understand how this works, because if you do, it's probably because you've been through it. It is helpful to me. I feel like I'm doing something that I wish somebody had done, but it's more of a feeling of responsibility at this point. I'm lucky enough to still be here. Other women, other children need to be in that same boat. I want to save people from being abusers too. People don't realize that a lot of times is abusers they aren't born that way. Something has happened. Nobody's intervened. Nobody's said something. Everybody must take responsibility for their own actions, and abuse is a choice. But a lot of times we know that those abusers come from bad homes. Bad things have happened to them. I work with the Rebound Foundation too today. I was at Central High School talking to the students about dating violence. And just hearing some of these kids and some of the things that they think are normal are the same things I thought is normal, but nobody's ever told them, hey, you know what? That's not normal. Yeah. To have somebody threaten you, I'll break up with you if you don't have sex with me. You're going to do it this way, or I'm going to show you. I'm going to beat you up. All of these things are stalking, and all of these things that the people are still dealing with that we shouldn't still be dealing with.
She's not the only person in Springfield I've found with a passionate voice on this topic. There are several people, and I'm hoping to get them on the show. What I've learned so far is victims have rights. Like, I know my rights when someone gets arrested on sitcoms or movies. What are those rights? I'm going to find out. I'm going to get back with you on that because I can't tell you. I don't know what the victim's rights are. Doesn't say in this report. Number 2, we need to trauma inform ourselves. What's that mean? I mean, everyone in the whole entire world needs to be more trauma informed. We need to take active measures to inform ourselves about what trauma means to a person's life. More homework for me. I'll get on it. I learned in the last episode that we need to become vulnerable. We got to tell our stories. We got to step into this hard shit and know that it'll be worth it. And we got to get involved. Janice gave some great ideas. You might even consider running for office. That's what my next guest did unsuccessfully when he ran against Missouri Congressman Billy Long in 2019. Okay, I'm calling all of my survivors brave, but look at this guy. I met him in 2018, back when I went to the Springfield Me Too rally. And I don't know why it was so surprising to me to see a Republican candidate with a tent at the rally. And then I sat down to talk with Benjamin Holcomb.
We're here with Benjamin Holcomb, who is running against Billy Long in his congressional seat. And you are also a Republican. Real quick, get it out of the way. What makes you think that you would be a good congressional candidate?
I like talking to people. I don't like hiding from what I do. I believe that being out and open and with the people is the best way to be.
And what is your background in politics? Do you have any experience?
No, actually. I did run for the same office in 2018. I was a first-time candidate, first time in politics, first time for everything. So I don't really have a background. I drive a semi, actually.
I ran into Benjamin at the Me Too rally last weekend. And so my first question is, what were you doing there?
I am a survivor of molestation twice, once when I was 12 and once when I was 19. So I was there as a survivor, and also I was campaigning. But the main reason that I was there, though, is because I'm a survivor. Our whole family is survivors. So
Your whole family is survivors. What does that mean?
well, I'm a survivor of molestation and abuse. My wife is a survivor of domestic abuse, and just found out recently my daughter is a survivor of rape.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that all of that has happened to you guys. Do you want to begin with what happened to you the first time?
Yeah. The first time was a family friend, and I'm sorry. This is the first time I've spoke about it, like really spoke about it, so it's gonna be hard. The first time was a family friend. I was 12 years old. It started at a friend's house in the front room, and it continued on to the bedroom and the bathroom and stuff like that. I'm not really for sure exactly what went on. I don't remember everything, but he just had me do stuff. I was 12, he was 20, in his 20s. I really didn't know what was happening or what to call it until I was probably about 15, and I was telling somebody about it, and they said, "It sounds like you were molested." And I was like, "Oh, great." I was like, okay. So I've been struggling with that. And then when I was 19, my mom's boyfriend, who she's still in communication with afterwards, basically held me up in a hotel room and basically told me I wasn't leaving until I did something. So I did what he wanted and finally told my mom about it a few weeks later. When I told her, she didn't actually believe me until she confronted him, and then he said, yeah, it happened, but he said that I brought it on, not him. I actually still see him. I'm still in communication with him. I still talk to him. It is hard to be with him. It's hard to see him because my mom's still in somewhat of a relationship with him. They say it's just friends relationship, but they've been together for 15 years. So I'm sorry, they're going to be together forever, and it's something that I've just dealt with. I've told her that as long as she lets me know before I show up at her house that if he's there or if he's not there, I'll be okay. I can mentally prepare for him to be there. But if I just show up, a few weeks ago I just showed up and he was there. It was so weird, so awkward, and that was the day I told her, I was like, I can't see him anymore unless you tell me. If you tell me, I'll be okay. I can prepare for it. She lives down in Kimberling City, so I can prepare for it in the drive down there. But for my mom's sake and the fact that I know that when she passes away, God forbid, that better be many years down the road. But when that time comes, I know I'm going to have to talk to him about it. They are life partners, and I'm going to include him in everything because it's just the person I am. She loves him whether she admits it or not, and they fight like they've been married 30 years. That's my story. I mean,
so she eventually believed you or not?
Yeah, she believed me. So I lived in Illinois. We all lived in Illinois. He moved to Missouri, and there was some talk back and forth between us, text messages that may have been slightly inappropriate. So I kind of get where he told her, sorry, I'm all over the place. He told her that it was confusing in his mind, which I get it, but I told him no that day. I told him no 2 or 3 times that day before I finally realized that I'm not getting out of here until I do something. So I did. And yeah, she believes me. We talk about it every once in a while. For the most part, I mean, it's made life hard. It really had. It made my marriage hard. My communication skills with my wife is terrible. It is so bad because I'm afraid all the time that I'm going to say something or do something and she's just going to be mad and leave. And I say this as she's sitting in the room. But after 6 years of marriage, almost 7 years together, almost 6 years married, I should realize that she's not going anywhere, but it's made it really hard.
It's good to have that support, though. Yeah, there's a lot of places that I could go with this story.
I said a lot in a short amount of time.
You did, yeah. Have you ever gone for help about this situation? Have you ever sought out a therapist?
No, not yet. I'm focusing on everything that's happened to my daughter lately. So she's in therapy and she's in counseling from it. Once she's taken care of, because she is top priority, I think we've decided I'm going to start, especially if we can find stuff that's cheap. I'm poor. so that I can work on my communication skills. I do come off angry sometimes. I'm not abusive anybody. Please don't think that. I get angry sometimes, and I know it's the whole I'm not understanding with my lack of communication skills with my beautiful wife. Sometimes I get really angry. So I'm hoping really, really soon to start once my daughter is done with all of hers, if she ever is. And then I'm going to start and work on communication skills and probably some anger issues. So.
Are you angry with your abuser?
Angry, no. Confused about it, yes, because he saw me as a son and I saw him as a father figure. My dad's not in my picture until here just a couple months ago, something like that, on Facebook. So mad, no. Confused, yes. Why he would do that to what he would consider a child of his.
Have you ever considered pressing charges?
No. It would completely ruin my relationship with my mom. So I'm honestly, I'm happy the way it is. See him periodically just to let, so that when the time comes that I have to deal with him with my mom's funeral, I can prepare for that. But no, I've never thought about it, and I won't ever do it.
You say that it affects your communication skills, which I think you're communicating perfectly fine here. You're doing a great job. How else has it affected you in regards to just your life in general, like jobs and relationships, friends?
I am a quiet person now. I don't like men. I don't like authority figure, which might be another reason why I don't like. I have issues with communicating with my wife because my wife is head of household. She is authority in our house, and she wears the pants in the relationship. And so sometimes I think maybe that's my issue. But anyway, work related. Driving trucks, I deal with men all the time. Whether it's loading my truck, taking, being in the shipping, receiving offices, anything like that. And it's difficult. If they come off to me with a little harshness, I shut down. I will still talk to them because it's my job to be polite with them, but I will shut down. And there are nights when it is bad, and if you ever see my wife out and around, you can ask her. I won't talk to her that night. I will ignore her because of just what I've dealt with that day. Even though she is my support system and she is the one I should be talking to, I would prefer to just sit in the back of my truck in darkness and just not talk to anybody. So,
from the stories that I've heard about the trucking industry, a lot of potential serial killers that travel around in those groups and what goes on at truck stops. And I don't know if any of that's actually true or not, but what do you hear in the trucking industry about sexual assault? Is it acceptable, or what's going on nowadays?
I actually have a story. I got to see child trafficking literally right in front of my truck one time in Houston. A guy had pulled up to my truck. He was Mexican. He asked me to come to his truck, and he asked me if I spoke Spanish. And as he was asking me, the back windows started going down, and there were two girls sitting back. Little girls, probably 10, 12. And when I said no, he rolled it up, said, "I'm sorry," and continued on. And I'm like, it took me a minute to realize what was going on. And I'm like, holy cow, that actually happens. I'd heard the stories just like you had. I'd never seen it firsthand until that moment. So yes, it happens. I have had some ladies come to my truck before and ask me if I wanted company, which in the trucking industry means, do you want services? It happens. Yeah. It really, really does.
Is there any kind of training that truckers go through with regards to that? What do they say about it?
Yes. So there is this wonderful group called Truckers Against Trafficking. It is a training, which I am certified. My truck is a safe haven truck now, meaning girls or boys or women, men, whatever, can come up to it and said, "I need help." I let them in my passenger seat, and then I call the cops immediately. I don't really know exactly what they say about it other than they're just trying to stop. They're wanting girls or whoever to be able to come up to trucks and say, I need help. I was not a safe haven when that happened, the story with the little girls. I actually didn't even know that group existed, or I would have done that. Mm-hmm. I don't speak Spanish, but, if I did, I would have said, I hate to say yes, I'll take them, but I would have agreed and then got them in and then called the cops, not do anything. I don't really know. I don't know specifically what they say. Right. It's just...
So maybe they don't say anything. They just let you figure it out. And
Well, we do go through a training class. I don't know if every major trucking company does it, but I know the company I work for, we actually take a video training course of how to handle it, what to do, who to call, what numbers, everything like that. So they do have a policy. I just know to get them in my truck, call 911, and we'll go from there. And then the number is literally on my window. Like I have a sticker on my window, so I can just call that number also. So like I know who to call, I know what to do, but I don't know what the...
That's kind of a relief to know that there is some movement to end trafficking with truckers.
I've heard a lot of stories where people have been going down the interstate and like the back of a camper or something, the window will open, or whatever, and they're, hey, woohoo, and so a trucker will call 911 even though we're not supposed to be on our phone while we're driving, but you know what, in my opinion, that's an emergency.
Right.
I'll do it.
Absolutely.
So
you were very open and willing to share your story with me. And you'd mentioned that you'd told it before. And I would think that your mother and your abuser would know that you're out here talking about this situation, or they don't?
No, not really. I don't really go into detail when I talk about it. Usually I just say I've been molested. I don't go into detail about it because in my opinion, especially when I'm campaigning, I feel like people are thinking I'm trying to get sympathy vote. And no, I'm not trying to get a sympathy vote. I'm just trying to tell you who I am. That I'm brave, that I'm bruised, but I am who I'm supposed to be. This is me. Shout out to The Greatest Showman. Love that movie. Sorry.
I thought you came up with that.
No, Greatest Showman.
Okay.
It is the theme song of The Greatest Showman.
That's right.
Absolutely love that. I listen to that song almost every day. And when I'm heading to events or something, if I need a little pick-me-up to make sure that I'm smiling by the time I get out of my car, I will play that song to remind myself of who I am, where I came from, and what I'm trying to do. My theme song. I love it.
Well, that seems like a perfect place to end this conversation. I'm bawling my eyes out. That was beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to add?
If I can find something, I have words of encouragement to end. So this is a song. It's from Lauren Daigle. It's called Rescue, and I heard it yesterday actually while I was mentally preparing for this. And I love the first verse. It says, "You are not hidden. There's never been a moment that you were forgotten. You are not hopeless, though you have been broken. Your innocence stolen. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS. Your SOS. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true. I will rescue you." I would say the only way so far that I've survived everything is my faith. Sorry. But I thank God every day for my wife. She's helped me so much to get through everything. She's forced me to face it, which has actually helped a lot. So, but that's just words of encouragement. You are not anything that they said you are. You are a wonderful person. Just remember that. So.
You can hear more of Benjamin and I's talking about both of our experiences with sexual trauma at rapethepodcast.com. There's a page there with links to everything that's been mentioned in this podcast, but please let me know if I missed anything. There's also information if you wouldn't mind supporting production costs of Rape the Podcast. And I've created a self-care page. It links to most of the resources available in Springfield, Missouri, as well as lists over 50 self-care ideas for the mind and other podcasts I've found on the topic of rape. In the next episode, is Springfield really leading the way? And how other cities are measuring up. And we'll hear from a mother of a sexual assault survivor. As always, visit rapethepodcast.com for more information. Rape the Podcast is produced by Chickedits. If you've ever wanted to produce a podcast, visit chickedits.com. That's all for this episode. I'm Julie Belew. Thank you for joining me for Rape the Podcast.